It started with a silence too heavy to ignore, not the peaceful hush of dusk or the calming quiet before sleep, but a weighted, suffocating stillness that pressed against the chest like grief. That night, Mason and Claire Holloway had driven down to Mason's childhood home in Cedar Hollow, Louisiana, to check on his ailing uncle before the storm was forecasted to hit. The news had warned of a possible Category 3 hurricane, but the Holloways were no strangers to hurricanes. They packed light, thinking they'd spend a night or two just in case. No panic, no dread, just another storm season in the south. Yet the air that evening didn't feel like it did in past storms. The wind didn't whisper through the trees. It paused, like it was listening. The skies were painted an unnatural purple grey, and the humidity clung to their skin like a cold hand. Mason had never known Cedar Hollow to be so eerily still. Claire glanced at the window for the third time in a minute, her brows knitting. "Is it just me? Or does it feel like the world's holding its breath?" she asked. Mason chuckled nervously. Probably just the pressure change. Hurricanes do weird things. That night, Uncle Ray insisted he was fine, though his hands trembled and his voice was frail. He sat by the window, sipping his tea, staring into the dense woods that bordered his property. "Storm's gonna bring more than rain," he mumbled, barely audible. Claire leaned in. "What do you mean, Uncle Ray?" The old man blinked slowly, his eyes unfocused. "There's things in the wind sometimes, things that don't leave when the sky clears. You feel 'em, you hear 'em. Whispers in the wind." They laughed it off as the ramblings of an old man who'd seen one too many storms. But that night, sleep didn't come easy. Mason lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening. There was no rain, no thunder, just the occasional thump, too rhythmic to be branches, and the soft, unsettling creak of wood expanding in the humidity. Around 2:17 a.m., Claire sat bolt upright in bed. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Mason was already halfway out of bed. From somewhere down the hallway came the distinct sound of a door creaking open, but all the doors had been shut, locked. They both knew that. The power went out before dawn, not with a flicker or warning hum, but a jarring snap, like the house itself had exhaled. The digital clocks died, leaving them stranded in a time that didn't feel like their own. Outside, the wind had returned, but not with fury. It moved strangely, in sharp gusts that came and went without rhythm, as if circling the house. Trees swayed unnaturally, like they were trying to speak. Uncle Ray was already dressed, sitting in the same chair, unmoved. "You hear them now?" he asked. Claire froze. "Hear what?" Ray's eyes locked with hers. "The voices. They ride the storm. Not everyone hears them, but they're always there, especially out here. The storm's not what you think." Mason tried to keep his cool. "We need to get out of here," he muttered, but Ray let out a tired sigh. "You can't outrun this kind of storm." That's when the first window shattered, inward, not from a branch, from nothing. Glass sprayed into the living room like a warning shot. Mason grabbed his phone, but there was no service. Claire backed away from the window, her voice cracking. "We need to go, now." As Mason reached for the front door, it refused to budge, as if something pushed back. The wind outside screamed for the first time. Shrill, high-pitched, almost human. Claire turned to Ray. "What's happening?" He slowly shook his head. "They remember, and they don't like strangers." It wasn't the storm that terrified them. It was what came with it. As the wind roared, the walls trembled with voices. Whispers so close they felt like they came from inside their skulls. "Get out. She knows. It's her," the voices hissed. Claire collapsed to her knees, clutching her head. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" Mason knelt beside her, trying to calm her down, but even he could feel something crawling behind his eyes. The house began to feel smaller, warped. Doors no longer led where they should. The hallway looped on itself, a window now open to a room they didn't recognize. Time unraveled. Claire swore she saw her childhood bedroom through a cracked closet door. Mason heard his dead mother's lullaby coming from the attic. They weren't alone. Shadows began to form in the corners, vaguely human but wrong in shape. Too long, too fluid. Claire screamed as one moved across the kitchen, vanishing into the floor. Mason backed them into a room and slammed the door, only to find Uncle Ray already inside. He looked older, paler. "This storm came once before," he whispered. 1953, took a whole family right from this house. Never found the bodies. Only the wind remained. That's when I knew this place was marked. Mason stared at his uncle in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Ray looked down. "Because it doesn't end when the storm passes." Suddenly, silence. Absolute. Terrifying. Claire reached for the window. The world outside was gone. Not black, not grey. Just blank. Like the world had been erased. Mason turned to Ray, but his chair was empty now. No sound of a door. Just gone. Claire sobbed. "This isn't happening. This isn't real." Mason held her close. "We'll get out. We'll find a way." They opened the door, only to find themselves back in the hallway again. But this time, the wallpaper was peeling. Photographs on the walls showed unfamiliar faces. Families that weren't theirs. Children they didn't know. In one photo, Mason swore he saw himself, younger. In another, Claire stood beside a woman she had never met. "What is this place?" she whispered. Mason couldn't answer, because he didn't know anymore. They kept moving, deeper into the house that no longer obeyed the laws of space or time. Then, in the basement, they found the source. A root, black, pulsing like a vein, stretched across the wall, whispering in 100 voices. The wind howled through cracks in the stone foundation. Claire stepped closer, hypnotized. "It wants something," she said. "It wants me." Mason pulled her back. "No, we go together. We end this together." The walls cracked. The foundation groaned. The storm outside had reached its peak. But it wasn't the wind that screamed. It was the house. In a final act of desperation, they lit fire to the root. Flames caught immediately, burning hot and blue. The whispers turned to shrieks, the shadows writhing. The walls convulsed. Mason dragged Claire out, through a hallway that seemed to fold in on itself, out a front door that hadn't existed minutes ago. They tumbled into daylight. The world had returned. The house behind them, gone, not burned, not destroyed, simply not there. In its place was an empty plot of land and a single wooden chair. Claire sobbed, shaking uncontrollably. Mason sat beside her, staring into the sky. No wind, no sound, just silence. But somewhere, deep in the air, the faintest whisper remained. It started with a silence that wasn't quite natural. Marla had lived on the outskirts of Vicksburg, Mississippi her whole life. She knew the rhythms of the land, the wind through pine trees, the croak of bullfrogs in the marshes, and the way storms rolled in like distant giants. But that Monday evening, Something was wrong. The air had weight, a thick, heavy pressure that pressed against her chest like an invisible hand. The birds had stopped. Even the cicadas, always shrill this time of year, had gone mute. Rusty, her golden retriever, whimpered beside her, staring into the woods like he saw something she couldn't. "Why is it so quiet?" she whispered, half to herself. The sky was an ugly bruise of purple and green, churning with a slow menace. From the corner of her eye, she thought she saw something shift behind the trees. But when she turned, nothing was there. The local radio issued a severe weather alert, but it wasn't the usual robotic voice. This one crackled with static, warped into a gravelly tone. Take cover, it remembers." By nightfall, the silence had turned into a sound, a deep, primal moan that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Not wind, not thunder, something else, something alive. Marla bolted every door and window, heart racing. She called her neighbor Tom. "This storm ain't right," she told him. Her voice shook. "It ain't," he agreed, breath short. Barometers crashed. Pressures so low. My ears popped inside the house. The trees, they're leaning the wrong way. The lights flickered, then died. Marla lit her grandmother's oil lamp. Shadows stretched long across the walls. Then came the noise from the backfield. Not wind. Something heavy, slow, crunching over broken branches. A dragging sound. She peeked through the shutters. The corn parted, not like wind bending stalks, like something was walking through it. At 11:03 p.m, the tornado sirens began. But there was no wind, no thunder, no rain, just that unholy howl growing louder and louder, a shriek that set her teeth on edge. She ran to the cellar, Rusty beside her, barking frantically. As she slammed the hatch shut, the entire house seemed to groan. The walls trembled. The sound overhead wasn't debris, it was scratching. Something was crawling across her roof. No storm did that. Inside the cellar, the air felt wrong, dense, breathing. The old radio came alive in her bag. Static turned to voices, hundreds at once, whispering overlapping sentences. "The wind is the key. The door must open. You are the offering." She dropped it. Rusty began to bark, backing into the corner. She had never seen him that scared. Time passed strangely. The howling stopped, then silence again. But not peace, a silence like a vacuum. When she finally dared to open the hatch, she stepped into a house that was no longer hers. Her front door was wide open. The hallway was covered in footprints, muddy, barefoot. Her bedroom mirror had a message scrawled in something that smelled like iron. "Don't sleep when the wind breathes." She turned slowly. Her eyes darted to the hallway. A shadow moved just past her vision. She grabbed the poker. Rusty refused to follow. His body low, tail between legs, growling. Outside, the field looked like a massive hand had clawed spirals into the earth. The barn door creaked open, though the wind hadn't stirred. She met Tom halfway down the road. His face was pale, shirt torn, and he was trembling. "I saw it," he whispered. "Tall, thin, no eyes. It was watching my wife sleep. She vanished right in front of me. The thing whispered and she was just gone." Together they walked to the barn. Inside, the air was rancid, thick with the stench of rot and copper. Hay was scattered in symbols she didn't recognize, and from the radio on the wall, the same voice returned. "The breath of the old ones rides the wind. The gate is opening." The barn's rafters creaked. A black shape darted just above them. Neither of them spoke. They drove away in silence. The road was warped, trees bending toward the car, groaning as if alive. The wind wasn't blowing. It was pulling everything inward toward the heart of the storm. The sheriff's office was deserted, phones dead, radios emitting low hums. They locked the doors, but it was useless. The wind passed through cracks. It whispered to them, not just words, names. Their names. Marla stared at the security monitor. For a second, she saw her own face in the hallway, but it blinked and grinned. "It has me," she said aloud. At dawn, Vicksburg was unrecognizable. Roads were torn like paper, trees uprooted, houses intact but wrong, full of vines, moss, earth, as if they'd stood abandoned for centuries. No sign of people, just silence. Some were found wandering days later, blank-eyed, mute. One clawed his own skin off, whispering, "It lives in the wind." Marla stood on the hill, staring at her reflection in a shard of glass. It moved when she didn't. It smiled. She returned to her home days later, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The house was full of shadows. The floors felt like skin beneath her feet. Rusty had vanished. In the attic, the whispers were louder. In the corner sat an old trunk she had never seen before. Inside were photos, her family, friends. But in every photo, someone stood in the background, a tall figure, always just out of focus. She burned the trunk, but the whispers didn't stop. That night, lightning split the sky again. She heard scratching at the walls. The radio turned on by itself. This time, the voice was clear. "You opened it. Now we come." She backed into the hallway. The walls breathed. Her reflection stepped out of the mirror, smiling, moving toward her. She screamed, but no one was left to hear. Weeks later, a rescue crew passed through the area. They found her house still standing, but covered in claw marks. The cellar door was open. Inside, they found the oil lamp still burning. No trace of Marla, just a recording in the radio loop. The wind is no longer a warning, it's a memory. The crew left before dark. One of them said he heard breathing in the trees, and when he turned, he swore he saw his own face, smiling back at him from the storm. It started on a Wednesday, not the kind of day you'd expect anything terrible to happen. The skies above Southport were unusually silent that morning, as if the clouds were holding their breath. Mark and Elena Grayson, both in their mid-40s, were sipping coffee on their porch, overlooking the lazy coastal stretch that had been their home for nearly a decade. Mark squinted toward the horizon. "Does the sky look off to you?" he asked. Elena tilted her head. The clouds weren't moving, not drifting, not churning, just hanging. By noon, the wind vanished entirely. Trees stood unnaturally still, and the ocean flattened like a sheet of glass. Seagulls disappeared. Dogs wouldn't bark. Even the sound of passing cars dulled, as if muffled by something unseen. The local weather station showed no alerts, no warnings, just calm. A sinister, absolute calm that made everyone on their street feel like they were waiting for something. Elena's unease deepened when the air started to feel dense, thick enough that breathing required effort. That night, the power flickered, then it died. All across the neighborhood, porch lights blinked out, TVs fell silent, and phones lost signal. The Graysons lit candles, trying to shake the unease. Mark reached for the battery-powered radio they kept for emergencies. It hissed with static. Then came the whispering. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, more like a breathy murmur threading through the static. Elena froze, the hair on her arms rising. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Mark nodded slowly, turning the dial. The murmuring intensified, then stopped. A low voice finally cut through. "Do not leave. Stay inside." And then silence. The message wasn't repeated. They looked at each other, the fear in their eyes saying what their mouths couldn't. Something was very wrong, and they were utterly alone. By early morning, the sky had changed. Not grey, not black, a shade somewhere between bruised purple and dead green. It felt unnatural, like something painted over the sky by a hand that had never seen real daylight. The storm was here, but it made no sound. No thunder, no rainfall, just windless chaos hanging in the sky. The neighbours gathered outside, their faces pale, eyes searching the skies, waiting. A low vibration began to hum beneath their feet, like a freight train approaching underground. A child began to cry. Someone screamed. Elena grabbed Mark's hand. "Underground. Now!" They ran back inside and yanked open the storm cellar, barely remembering the last time they used it. As the heavy door slammed shut above them, the vibration turned into a howl. But it wasn't the wind. It sounded human. The cellar was pitch black, save for the flickering light of their emergency lamp. It cast long, trembling shadows on the concrete walls. Elena paced, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "This isn't just a storm," she said, her voice brittle. "Something's wrong with the air, the light, everything." They weren't alone down there, or at least it didn't feel like it. Every so often they'd hear soft thuds above, footsteps, impossibly slow and heavy. But no one should have been walking in that wind. Not with the howling, not with the windows upstairs shattering one by one. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps on the door at the top of the cellar steps. Mark held his breath. Elena mouthed, "Who is that?" But the answer never came. Hours passed, maybe more. There was no way to tell. Their phones were dead. The radio now played nothing but white noise, interspersed with faint crying. Not a child's voice, an adult, broken and begging. "Don't let it in," the voice sobbed once, then silence again. Then it hit, a force like nothing either of them had ever felt. The entire house above them groaned, then screamed, wood splintering, beams cracking. They heard it being ripped away, torn from the earth. Dust and dirt rained down from the cellar ceiling. Elena clutched Mark as they huddled in the farthest corner. Then, nothing. A vacuum of silence, like the world itself was holding its breath again. But what followed was worse than the noise. It was a whisper right behind them. When they dared to open the cellar doors, there was no house left, no neighborhood, just fragments, shattered wood, crumpled cars, and an eerie emptiness stretching in all directions. They stood in what appeared to be the center, the eye, of the cyclone. But there was no wind, no sound. Then they saw the others. Dozens of people standing silently in the distance, staring, unmoving, not approaching. Their clothes were shredded, their skin ashen. Mark shouted. No one reacted. Elena stepped forward, and all of them turned in unison. Their eyes were completely black. Then they spoke, not with their mouths, but directly into Mark and Elena's minds. "We live in the storm. You opened the cellar." They ran. Across what used to be their town. Familiar streets now barren, twisted. But the horizon never changed. The more they ran, the more it stayed the same. Time warped. Their watches spun out of control. Mark tripped on something. A mailbox embedded in the ground. But the house it belonged to didn't exist anymore. By nightfall, they returned to the cellar. It was the only thing that remained whole. The storm roared in the distance again, but it never approached. As they descended the stairs, the door slammed shut above them. A soft voice from the radio crackled back to life. You were warned. Weeks passed, or maybe hours. There was no more counting. The cellar became their world. Every so often they heard things above. Things dragging, whispering, breathing. They ate what was left of the emergency supplies, drank the last of the water, waited, until one day there was silence again. Elena climbed out. The town had returned, whole, normal. The houses stood. The birds sang, but something was off. People walked past her without recognition. Her home had new owners who didn't know who she was. Her name was gone from every record. Mark was nowhere to be found. And the storm? It had never been reported.